Welcome to my sewing room. Today we have the most exciting show for you, lace making on the machine. The first example of making wonderful lace on the sewing machine using built-in embroideries is this beautiful corsage I have. The rose has built-in embroideries and scallops on the top. The leaf is built-in embroideries from the sewing machine done on netting. The only thing that's purchased here is the florist wire that attaches the pieces together. You want to make some beautiful things for a wedding? Well, let me just share some things you might want to do. This wedding handkerchief is absolutely out of this world, and you know, it would be beautiful framed also. On the batiste in the middle is a beautiful built-in embroidery design. Insertion is shaped around the edges, and then netting is on the very edge with a flower and some leaves on the end. What a beautiful handkerchief for a bride to carry. Speaking of a bride, wait until you see this. Absolutely incredible wedding veil. First of all, every bit of this piece was done on the sewing machine. Little pieces made and put together one by one, all of the headpiece, and then these are folded silk ribbon roses. But every bit of this headpiece was done on the sewing machine. Then this is the blusher that's reasonably simple. Let me show you what goes down the side of this veil. It was the Point d'Esprit English netting, but that's the one that has the little dots on it. This is applique, machine embroidery, and then French edging on the very edge. What a magnificent veil. You know, you might even have your bridesmaids to wear this beautiful blouse done with embroidery done on netting. Absolutely magnificent. By the way, this is the Australian blouse pattern, and it comes in a size 6 to 28. So if you had a lot of different sizes of people in your wedding, you can make one of these for each person, and believe it or not, they might even wear it again after the wedding was over. Come along with me to the technique boards, and let's just see how easy it is to make magnificent lace with your sewing machine. There are some very simple steps to making lace on their sewing machine, and no, you don't have to have a really fancy sewing machine. I've used some stitches here which are very simple ones. First of all, you start with netting. Now this is cotton netting, but it doesn't have to be. You can use a tulle or nylon netting. You've got to have a stabilizer. So I've used the water-soluble stabilizer, a layer of netting, at least one more layer of water-soluble stabilizer. Now you can put as many as 2 or 3 on the front of the back, depending on how thick you want it. This shows that we have pressed with a dry iron, I might add. You know, don't use wet iron or steam iron on water-soluble stabilizer. We pressed it, it made it sort of stiff. Now the reason I've got this Teflon pressing sheet up here is because it really is better when you're working on the solvay. It really is better to go ahead and press it with a Teflon sheet rather than putting your iron, because it might stick. Now then, this is how you work. All right, after this has been stabilized, this is sort of like insertion. You see there's a little fancy stitch over here and a fancy stitch over here and the little heart stitch down the middle. But you see, this is basically lace insertion. Now here's another piece that sort of is like insertion. It has 3 different fancy stitches, one in the middle, well, 2 different fancy stitches, one in the middle and the same one on each side, but basically it's straight. Now let's go over here to make some edging. All right, very simple to do. Stabilize your netting, and then you can use a decorative scallop stitch. After you stitch it, then cut away. Now then, if you use the solvay behind here, you might just want to cut away the netting first. All right, this one was really stiff. All right, now then, here I've done the scallop, and then I'm going to trim away the netting, and then all you need to do is just put the solvay in some water and it will go away. Now let's see if I'm going to make a little bonnet. I'm going to use this edging to make a little bonnet, the little edge on the bonnet. In other words, to make lace edging. All right, I stitch a straight stitch, a decorative stitch, and then a little scallopy stitch on the side. As always, when I want to gather something, I'll run 2 rows of gathering stitches. I have my decorative stitch on the side, pull it up and gather it. Now this is maybe like a fancy band or the edge of a little bonnet, all done on the machine. Straight stitching, zigzagging, decorative stitching, then gather the lace. You see we've made the lace, and by the way, then after you wash it all out, by the way, this is in white and this is in ecru. After you wash it all out, then it won't be stiff. It really will be lace made on the sewing machine. I have asked my very dear friend and very, very superb machine artist, Louise Baird, to come and join me on the show and to talk with you a little bit more about lace making. Louise is one of the finest machine artists in the world. And Louise, it's always such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. Lace making on the computer machines of today is really a lot of fun because there's so many choices in the stitches that you might use. Here is a couple of cards that I have. And when you make an insertion lace, you want a design that is a center design. It's not facing one way or the other, sort of like this design here would be a nice center design. And then on the sides of the center, use a one-way design on each side of it. Of course, you can use your mirror image or reverse design also. Okay, this one again, this is a nice little center stitch, whereas this one would be one to place on the side. Now, when you begin, also to use, instead of regular decorative thread, use a heavier weight thread. Now this thread has red writing and there's a 30 on it, and that means it's 30 weight thread, whereas this one has black writing on it and it's 40 weight. The 30 weight thread is a little bit heavier than the 40 weight thread, and it'll take your stitches to make them show much better. Okay, just like Martha said, you want to stabilize your fabric, and here on this one I have ironed my netting between a couple of layers, and again I did use the pressing sheet.
The Teflon pressing sheet
on top of it. Now this piece I've stabilized by making my own liquid stabilizer and dipping my netting into this liquid stabilizer and allow it to dry. And that
How do you make that liquid stabilizer?
You take all those little scraps of solvay that you have and mix it in water and make it into sort of a egg white mixture thickness. Okay. And dip your netting into it, allow it to dry, and it makes your fabric or netting really stiff. So
now you
that
haven't
you can
pressed
work
that
it.
netting then?
No, I have pressed it. Once it's dried, you can press it and it'll actually stiffen it up a little bit more again.
All right.
Okay, now to make insertion lace, rather, on this little piece here, I've got insertion where I've got a flower down the center and a design on either side of it. And to make a matching edging, what I've done is to take the same flower design and do the inside stitch that I used on the insertion and place it on the outside. And I really did this to show you that you don't have to have a scallop to do it. You can use it any type of stitch because it's not going to be, the netting does not ravel like fabric ravels.
So really with an almost plain sewing machine, you could do this,
yes,
couldn't you? Just as long as you have a few decorative stitches.
Correct. Even just a regular satin stitch might work great. This is a piece of edging that I did, and instead of stabilizing the fabric itself, I added the water-soluble stabilizer underneath it. And when I do this, I find it's easier to trim away just the netting and leaving the solvay, then cutting away the solvay later on. It just gives me something to hold on to. And with these stitches, again, you can see it doesn't have to be a satin stitch that you a satin scallop that you do the edging with. You really can use almost any stitch. I have a piece of fabric underneath here that has been sandwiched between a couple of layers of solvay, and this is just to show that you can use a single pattern and stitch an all over design with just one single pattern. So you would choose most of the time like a satin stitch or something, engage your pattern stop and just stitch one stitch at a time, and whenever it stops I'm just gonna let it tie off. I'm gonna lift my foot a little bit and move it, change it around, do another one. And again, the more you want it filled, the more little hearts or whatever designs that you would want to stitch on it.
That's all you have to do. Louise, if you were doing that on a real garment, would you go in and mark those places where you were going to do it? Yeah.
Well, I would.
You wouldn't just randomly stitch them like that then?
You can randomly stitch it, but also I would also outline my garment so that I wouldn't put them where I didn't need them.
Wouldn't put the dots where you didn't need the dots. Louise, thank you so much for being here today to share with us how easy it is to do lace making on the sewing machine. And next, we have another technique for you. This beautiful little baby present is just one of my very favorites. You want to know a little secret? Even if you use the beautiful and very expensive English netting, 100% cotton, you could still make this baby gift for about $5. If you used a tulle, a nylon tulle, let me just turn around to see how this pretty tea bonnet looks on the little model I have here. If we used a tulle, I think this present could be made for about $1.50, and that would include buying your ribbons. There's nothing any sweeter than a tea bonnet on a baby, or else on a doll. Don't forget our little baby dolls. They love to wear tea bonnets too. Let me share with you exactly how this tea bonnet is made. This is all there is to a tea bonnet. There's a piece that goes across the head, a pretty little ruffle, and since we made all of our lace, all we had to buy was just a little bit of ribbon and the netting to make it on. And then the back part comes down like this, and then when you get ready to put it on your baby's head or your doll's head, you tie these ribbons and put it on under the chin. Now let's see how easy it is to make this tea bonnet, and we're going to make the lace. Sometimes when you're making a ruffle, you have got to join some seams because this has a lot of ruffling on it. So in order to join this stabilized netting, I'm going to just make a straight seam, and then I'm going to trim it down to about 1/4 inch. That's the step number one. Then I'm going to come in here and just tightly zigzag over, encasing the rolled edges as well as that seam I just made. And then when I open up the ruffle piece, it'll have that little rolled and whipped seam on there. That's perfectly all right. That's what it's supposed to have. Of course, you could also just serge the pieces together. Now then, I'm going to use a wider strip. I'm going to show you how to make the ruffle. This has already been stabilized. I'm using a wider strip than I need because it's just easier to work with that way. After I run the 2 rows of gathering, you can see right there, then I'm going to come in and trim away this excess. I do not need a piece this wide for the ruffle. Coming down here, you can see that little seam where I join the pieces because I really have to have sort of a long ruffle to go around the baby bonnet. Now the next thing comes to make the insertion that goes across the head and goes down the center of the back piece. So I have a wing needle entredot here, just a little flower stitch here, a wing needle entredot here, or you could just zigzag. You do not have to have wing needle entredot. Now this is the piece that goes down in the back. I put ruffling all the way around the edge. Now let me show you how I attached it. I simply laid it down, stitched 1 time, straight stitching, trimmed it away, the excess, and then go back and zigzag over that. And then that is all there is to making the back piece. Of course, I've got to have a few little ribbons to tie it with. Let's go back and look one more time at the finished bonnet. This bonnet has had all the stiffening washed away, the solvay has been dissolved, and you can see I put a little tie right here that's to go under the chin, and a little tie right here that's to go under the chin. And these 4 other, here's the back piece that goes down the back of the baby's or the doll's head, and then this little string or ribbon ties with this little ribbon ties with this little ribbon, and I'll step over here one more time and show you this absolutely precious tea bonnet. This is the back piece that I just showed you how to make, and see there's a little place where the little head or the little hair will show through, and then let's turn it all the way around. Here's our precious little tea bonnet, and remember this is a very inexpensive gift to make, even if you use the fabulous English cotton netting. And it is a super inexpensive gift to make if you use the nylon tulle or the bridal tools. And next, we have a wonderful craft for you. I am so pleased to have as my guest today Joanna Pullen Hammett. Joanna has a wonderful craft for you today. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to claim that one to go in my sewing room. Joanna, tell us about your craft.
Isn't it pretty?
I really
just
like
love it.
that
This is
little
called a
pincushion.
mannequin pincushion. And the end product will look like this. And now I'll show you how to make it. First, you take your 2 pattern pieces of your mannequin, cut them out, and they'll look like this. Next, you'll sew the darts. There's 4 darts. After the darts are sewn, you'll take your 2 pieces and you will, if I can get them straight, you'll sew them together from top to bottom, leaving the opening open. You will flip your mannequin pieces inside out and it will look like this. Remember that bottom is open. Next, you will take your filling and stuff it in there all the way to the top, leaving 4 inches in the bottom. You will take your plastic pebbles and fill it up in the bottom. This is what gives the mannequin its weight so it won't fall over. Next, you will take your piece of cardboard, which looks like this, stick it in the mannequin and glue it down. After that is glued down, you will take your lining, circle lining, pin it, and sew it all the way around, one big circle, leaving no openings except for the opening in the center. You will then turn it inside out. You will then take the lining, as you see on here, cover the bottom of the mannequin, and sew at 8 different spots. Next, you will put the buttons or any other kind of decor that you would like. Here you see the lace around the neck and then some other lace surrounding the silhouette.
Little braids. And did you leave a little piece, a little opening there so the scissors can go in?
Right. And here's your opening where you can put anything you want. Scissors,
thread,
anything you want. So this is kind of a handy mannequin.
That's a very handy mannequin. I think I would like it, especially for pins and scissors and maybe a spool of thread or whatever
anything
you just need to put your hands on real quickly. Joanna, thank you so much for bringing this adorable craft to us. And next, I have an antique technique for you. You know how much I love antique clothes. When I found this petticoat, shortly after it, I found a little dress that had the same technique I'm going to share with you. So from 2 different locations entirely, the same technique. This technique is a folded tuck. You can see right here the tuck, and it has been stitched down. Instead of being stitched with the regular seam, it's been stitched with wing needle entredot. Now, this of course was done with a hem stitch machine around the turn of the century because hem stitch machines were available from the 1850s. You see there are 1, 2, 3 tucks, and it's been stitched down with hem stitching. Come on down to the next row, and you can see there's 1 more tuck which also has been stitched down with a hem stitch. And isn't this pretty lace on the bottom of this petticoat? I'm telling you, these Victorians put as much time on their petticoats as they did on their outside clothes, I think. Now this dress is absolutely wonderful, so I'm going to show you all of the details. First of all, the little neckline has gathered edging. Then as we come down the dress, and by the way, this dress is silk. As we come down the dress, you can see the pretty insert edging over here. But look, isn't that wonderful? Just a little bit of smocking. And then no more smocking, has kind of a puffy front. And then a little bit more smocking, which is so sweet. And then the little drop-waisted midi dress. Now, I think this is real interesting. There are a few gathers, just running stitches in here without any smocking. So they did their gathers with just little stitches. Now come on down, let me move this out so you can really see carefully. Do you see once again the same technique, a tuck, which has been stitched down with hem stitching. That came off the old hem stitching machine. We call it wing needle entredot on today's machines. Once again the tuck, which has been stitched down with that beautiful hem stitching, which we have hem stitching on our machines today. Now let me show you really how simple this technique is to do. All right, I've drawn 2 lines here as if this were my skirt. This is the stitching line, the dotted line, and this is the fold line. So in order to do this, I'm going to fold it on the fold line and press it, and then fold it back down, and I have my tuck that has been folded in, pressed, and then folded back down. Now, the stitching line, you remember I told you the stitching line were the ones that had the dip dots on them. So I've got the tuck, which is folded down, the bottom of the skirt is down, and now then I'm going to wing needle entredot on that stitching line. Now all I do is simply put my wing needle entredot stitch on, and many machines do have a wing needle entredot stitch now. And you know, I'm going to take this pin out. No machine company in the world suggests you sew over a pin. You put stabilizer underneath, and you just wing needle entre deux. All you do is guide it right in the middle. And this wonderful technique of stitching down a tuck with wing needle entre deux will be one that I think you might like to do, especially if you're so fortunate as to have a machine, one of these wonderful machines that does a wing needle entre deux stitch. Now you might ask, which size wing needle do I use? Well, I usually use a 100 wing needle, but it's okay if you want to use a 110 or a 120 wing needle. They will work just fine also. And next, I would like to invite you to come to my attic where I have another wonderful antique garment for you. This is a beautiful white Victorian dress. I almost called it the X dress, and I'll show you why in just a minute. It has a perfectly wonderful neckline, as usual, with a pretty trim and a couple of pieces of insertion. Just look at the bodice work on this dress. I mean, they have everything from insertion and batiste strips and Swiss embroidered strips, and then here's a miter going on down to a miter. And before I leave the top, I just have to show you these really pretty sleeves. I mean, if that isn't a beautiful sleeve, I don't know what a beautiful sleeve is. With the different trims and the way the laces go up and down and the beautiful Swiss trim. The waistline also is very attractive and unusual. It's almost like a little lace belt. 2 pieces of insertion with some bias trim in the middle. And now I told you I was going to tell you why I almost called this dress the X dress, so I'm going to hold this skirt up here and show you. Isn't this a wonderful skirt? With the insertion, the Swiss insertion, the French. Now look. Do you see the X that has been crossed over? And then there's an X over there, and as I move around this side, there's another X. Isn't that pretty lace shaping? And then the bottom is very tailored with 2 more pieces of insertion, 1 piece of Swiss, 2 pieces of French, and then just a pretty double hem folded up. The back of the dress is equally as wonderful as usual. Let me just share with you just a minute how pretty the back is. Absolutely wonderful lace shaping, comes down into a V on both sides. And then look once again at this little belt. I just think this is very, very unusual to have a little lace belt that comes around to the back. For our Sewing from the Heart today, I have a really wonderful letter from the American Sewing Guild, one of my favorite organizations. This is the Indianapolis chapter at Indianapolis, Indiana. The letter says, newborn infants come in a variety of sizes, sometimes ahead of schedule and so small that it's impossible to buy clothes for them. Garments made for dolls usually don't fit human babies, especially through the arms and shoulders. To help reduce the number of worries troubling families of premature babies, members of the Indianapolis chapter of the American Sewing Guild make tiny, especially designed premium angel gowns, bonnets, booties, and blankets for distribution through area hospitals. Local merchants contribute much of the fabric and other materials used in the project. According to Betty Stillard, the Preemie Gown Project Coordinator, the chapter has donated more than 1,700 articles since the project began in 1993. Displays of the tiny garments at special events such as the Indiana State Fair attract a lot of attention and draw new members to the American Sewing Guild. Betty has also conducted numerous workshops for neighborhood groups affiliated with the Indianapolis chapter. We are grateful to the Phoenix, Arizona chapter of the American Sewing Guild for the original patterns and the encouragement. Indianapolis Guild members have shared their enthusiasm and expertise with other American Sewing Guild chapters. And they say if you're interested in knowing more about what they have done, just contact the Indianapolis chapter of the American Sewing Guild. You know, I did a wonderful workshop in Indianapolis for the American Sewing Guild a number of years ago and still remember all of you with great fondness. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today, and I would really like to invite you to come back next time.